Welcome, friends and fellow horse fiends. You've landed on Come Ride With Me, a podcast dedicated to helping you find harmony, joy, and success in your riding. I'm your host, Anna Fox of Equus Enlightened. This pod isn't about training your horse, but about training you to be the best partner for your horse. Listen to find out how I use my intention to direct my ride. You'll hear how I decide what to focus on, what to say yes to, and when to redirect my horse. You'll see how not getting frustrated or overwhelmed is the easiest path to sanity and harmony. So, what are you waiting for? Come ride with me. Hey, horse fiends. Thanks for tuning. Oh my goodness. Starting off on a good note. Thanks for tuning in to another bonus episode of Come Ride With Me. I hope you enjoyed last week's episode of Winter Learning Ideas. I have to admit that I am not a winter person. I don't like to be cold. I don't like the dark. And I used to loathe the training time I thought I was losing. Not being in Florida or having an indoor arena. All the things. But many years ago now, I was excited to go down to Florida for a clinic at Karen Rolfe's Temenos Fields. One, because it was with Karen. Two, because it was going to be warm-ish. We actually had some cold days, but cold mornings anyway. And I still remember that because I was really looking forward to the warmth. But I got so many ideas, and she really encouraged us to play with the ideas, to not be afraid to be messy, to not be afraid to be successful too quickly and then not do any more for that day. Sometimes we feel like our horse does it right the first time and we're like, oh, what do we do now? And Karen really encouraged us to embrace that and embrace the messiness of the journey and not always expect everything to look perfect. So it was a great week down there. It actually started to snow just as I unloaded old Gus from the trailer in Virginia. And I thought, of course it would. Because now I've got all this motivation and it's going to freaking snow. We actually did get quite a bit of snow that winter. But I was so motivated from the clinic that I just had fun experimenting. And that winter was really a whole new evolution in my horsemanship. So fast forward several years, and Gus happened to have an injury in the late fall that set us up to start rehabbing in the middle of winter. And I remember it was really cold that winter, like single-digit temps in the mornings. I know we had some snow, but I don't know if we had a lot. And I was working full-time nights in 911 then. But I was not to be deterred, right? I had continued building my toolbox up to this point. I knew we had the skills to get back on track, even with the sketchy weather. And of course, I wanted to come out in the spring and be able to compete again. So I would get to the barn after work, about 7:30 in the morning, in the single-digit temps, and don my coveralls and muck boots and get to work. We did do lots of groundwork and stall exercises, but when it was decent enough, I would hop on Gus bareback and ride him up and down the driveway, because sometimes it would be too icy or even too snowy to ride him around in the snow. And I did use that as a rehab thing when we kind of got to that point and we were building some more strength. But in the beginning, we didn't want to have that extra strain. So I was really having to flex my creative brain and also use all of these skills that I had learned to keep him in a place where I could come out, hop on him bareback in the snow or in the ice, and usually in a rope halter. Like, I didn't even put his bridle on most of the time. He was fine with that. So It was a lot of things that I had worked on in our training just really coming together at this kind of crazy time. And having to kind of flex my creative brain. I would have told you back then that that didn't really exist, right? I was this typical type A overachiever who marched through the books like a soldier on a mission. And if someone asked me about being creative, I would say, look, I can barely draw a stick figure. Of course, what I've learned since then, and as I've matured, is that creativity is more than just art class, right? So humans are creative in a million, probably a bazillion different ways. And so are horses. Just think about that naughty pony that you could never keep in anywhere. And play is one of the ways that we can be creative. Horses have a really high play drive, right? That just means they value play a lot. It's one of their favorite things next to eating and being safe is play. And that's why we see so much play, especially amongst young horses, because in that way they are like young children. And they learn best at play. I believe it's one reason that keeping horses separate from other horses can be detrimental to their learning abilities. But that's a whole nother discussion. In fact, maybe it's one I'll bring up on Patreon for everyone to discuss there. Because what I think happens to humans as we become adults is that we lose our ability to play. And I can think in some ways that this can happen to horses who aren't afforded the opportunity to play. They kind of shut down that piece of themselves. Humans do this because we don't see the value in it, right? The value of work is instilled in us, and then we project that onto our horses. Last week, I even used the word work in the video, and as I was editing it and replaying it, I thought to myself, oh, I should have thought of a different word. And sometimes I think maybe play is, I don't know if that's the right word either, because are we really, as humans, playing with our horses? I don't know. I'd like to think so, but sometimes definitely in the situation of training, they probably wouldn't say it was play, right? So using the word work is just a force of habit. But I know vocabulary matters. So I do try to change my words around when I'm talking about things like this, but I'm not always successful. I mean, how many times have you heard someone compliment a horse for having a good work ethic? Do horses really know what work is? Do they care? I doubt it. And science currently says that horses like to play. They don't like to work, they like to play. So, you might have to be creative to figure out how to play with your horse, how to motivate your horse. When talking about play, you're simply imagining running around at liberty with your equid while it kicks and jumps and snorts. That's cool. You can do that too. But there are other ways that we can play with horses. Just like there are other ways we play with young children to teach them things. Dogs are much the same way, that you can play with them in different ways. And a lot of times, I feel like we don't hear the connection between our domestic dogs and horses being made, and some of the training ideas that work with both, because people get so focused on the fact that the horse is a prey animal, right? And the dog would be considered a predator. But when you boil it down to their drives and what they like to do, it's play, it's have fun. You can break your training down by using that play drive, whether it's a dog or a horse or a kid. That may sound super simple. Don't come at me for that, but that's the way that I look at it. now that I have small children, I like to think of ways that we can make things fun for them to learn. And leading a volunteer organization, I often have to think of fun things to do to motivate adults. And for my students who are working people, especially if they own their own business or they supervise people at work, I have this analogy that I use with them that is, imagine that you've been told by your bosses that you need to change a huge part of what you're doing, right? Like maybe a project is getting scrapped, or they've decided to go in a different direction with a project, and your team, your people have been working on this project, really hard for months, and it's going to be kind of devastating to them that we need to change things up. And it's probably going to be a lot more work in a short amount of time, right? So this could be really a tough meeting to have, a tough thing to have to tell people, right? And you could take the attitude of, I'm going to walk into this meeting, I'm going to hit up the Starbucks beforehand, I'm going to grab all this paperwork I need to give out to them, and I'm going to walk into the meeting room and I'm going to say, I know this is going to piss you all off, but... and then go on with your spiel. Or you could walk into the meeting with boxes of coffee and donuts from Dunkin' for the whole group and say, I've got an exciting announcement. And it might involve a lot of work and we're going to have to change the way we're doing things. Do you see how that approach is different? Like, how did that approach make you feel, right? Just thinking about it. Can you relate to that? And think about approaching your horse in the same way. I'm a big advocate of not making things too tight. One of my pet peeves is the girth. Yes, I know we all need to be safe and we need to not roll off our horses, but we also need to have good balance and our saddles need to fit properly, etc., etc. So, that is an analogy that I often use with tightening up the girth, especially for someone who likes to do it right out of the gate, or in the cross ties, or in the stall, or, before they've given the horse even a chance to walk around. They're like cranking up the girth, right? You want to start your meeting off with, I know this is going to piss you off, but? Or do you want to bring coffee and donuts and then try to have a play session with your horse? So that is one of my favorite analogies for people. I hope it helps you when you think about greeting your horse and when you think about introducing something new or different or something that may be difficult. Like, imagine every time you show up to your horse, you have the power to guide the energy and creativity for that meeting. You also have the power to shut it down and make it no fun at all. If you start out, like me, believing that you are without a creative bone in your body, or that you've just shoved it down so far you can't find it anymore, start small with this. Just start noticing things. Pay attention to your own mood and energy as you approach your horse, as you do things with your horse. Start to notice how your horse reacts to things. Notice what they like, what they don't like, what they aren't sure about, or you aren't sure about. Maybe you're not sure, do they like this or not? That's an interesting expression. What does that mean? Just start noticing. This is a great mindfulness practice. It will help you get out of your head and leave all of your non-barn junk behind you when you're with your horse. It opens your mind up to what is going on around you right now. There is a trick, though. Don't be judgmental. Notice without judgment. Notice with curiosity. Wonder, is that an all the time thing my horse does? Or is it just a now thing? Ask yourself with a playful mind, could I change that? Could you say at any time, I'm having fun, and I think my horse might be having fun? If not, can you notice a point of tension? Make noticing a game you play with yourself. And this game is also fun to play away from horses. You will be surprised at how much this can impact your riding and your horsemanship skills. Simple things like noticing which hand do you brush your teeth with. And can you switch which hand you brush your teeth with? And when you switch, do you happen to switch back in the middle of brushing to your dominant hand without even noticing? If you do that, can you start to notice when that switch happens? Notice, how tricky your mind can be and how these little habits that are so ingrained in us just sneak in there and we don't notice them. And there are a lot of habits that we have around horses and the way that we work with horses that are not always serving us the best. Do you always lean on one hip? Do you drive with one particular hand? Just start noticing these things without judgment. Start noticing how other people are walking. Notice their gait pattern, their posture. Can you notice if they seem to be in a hurry or they're stalling? Again, you're doing all of this without judgment. If you are in a barn full of people and you have a bad weather day, or I don't know, you just want to have a not riding day, get together in the arena and try to mimic each other's gait, right? It's fun to see other people do an impression of you walking and see what you think that shows, right? And you'll notice that everyone's interpretation is different. And then you can pretend to be in a hurry, or pretend to be angry, or pretend to be really tired and lazy, or going to this work meeting you don't want to go to. And notice how your gait changes, how the posture changes. Some people, me included, are going to have a hard time with sort of upping the energy and keeping it playful. You're generally not going to see me skipping down the road, even if I'm very happy about something. For people like that, for people like me, it can be hard to activate that play drive. I definitely noticed that when I had kids, and I actually noticed it before, many years ago, at a clinic, and the instructor was talking about playing and teaching someone else a private lesson, and it was really early in the morning, and I'm not a good morning person. I just remember sitting there and thinking, yeah, that is my problem. I don't play well with others. So, if you know that about yourself, that's cool. Make it an exploration, right? Don't judge yourself. But now that you've noticed this, could you change it? Are you playful enough for your horse? Is there another horse that you're around that maybe you are playful enough for, right? Like, for instance, Gus is a low energy horse. He's also not Mr. Playful. You don't often see him out in the field or ripping it up. Well, you never see him out in the field ripping it up. You may occasionally see him out in the field playing with another horse, but, right, he's kind of like me. He doesn't play that well with others. Now, is that because of his personality, or is that because he was a young stallion and he wasn't really allowed to be around other horses? I don't know the answer to that question, but it's an interesting thing to ponder. So, the two of us trying to get together enough play drive to be exuberant and do upper level dressage was always kind of a challenge. Whereas another horse may come with a lot more energy and a lot more exuberance and a lot more built-in play drive. And that horse I'm playful enough for, right? We can make it happen. So just notice these things and it'll help you in the future when you need to, ride different horses, work with other horses, whatever. If you need to buy another horse, you'll be interested to know these things. That way you can try to match your personality to your horse. And because of my normal way of going, even though I'm a type A and I'm a driven person, I'm pretty laid back externally. And I was pretty good at calming things down with a horse. But when I needed the energy, I didn't have that playful side to go to. And I really had to get outside of my own shell. It's still something that I struggle with, but I know that about myself. I can laugh about it and move on, right? I'm not judging myself for not being good at it. I'm just like, that is the way it is. Can I get better? But not having that sort of playful side, when I upped my energy, it was more like I upped my intensity, my drive, and that caused tension in the horses instead of like a playful exuberance, right? So if you're competing in sport with your horse, there are going to be times when you want to have energy and exuberance even. As you go up the levels, that's something that you need. That is why Grand Prix horses of any discipline are not riding club schoolmasters, okay? But this is challenging for a lot of riders. Some people, like me, just don't have that well practiced, playful, and exuberant side. So if they start feeling that from the horse, they're like, what is this? I got to shut it down. That is something that I have learned to change. Now I can tell the difference between what is anxiety in the horse and what is excited and exuberant and like ready to go. Others can feel that energy from a horse and it becomes fear in the rider. It's also something I find with people who are high energy. If the horse is also high energy, that's like a lot of energy. And for instance, the canter a lot of times becomes a bone of contention because it's like just an explosion waiting to happen because there's so much energy from both parties. So in that case, it's hard for a rider to know whether the anxiety is coming from them or their horse or they're just feeding off each other. And of course, this feeling becomes more prevalent in the winter for a lot of people, right? The horses are feeling better. It's cool. It's maybe windy, whatever. Some horses are stalled more, so they're not moving their bodies as much as they should be, which causes their muscles to get tight and for them to feel jumpy and things like that. I encourage riders to notice this in their horse and in themselves. I've seen lots of riders get into trouble because either they think it's their problem and they can get over it, or they think the horse has the problem and they are rider enough to overcome it. Either way, it can be a disaster, and I think if you're having any fear or anxiety about riding a horse in the winter or anytime, right? Stay on the ground. You can get a lot of work done on the ground. Oh, I used the word work again. You can get a lot of things done on the ground that will improve your training. You can gain a lot of confidence on the ground, and you can notice a lot of things on the ground. right? Go back to noticing. That is so important. What is making your horse tight? Where are they holding the tension? I used to think that the value in groundwork was preparing your horse for riding. And I think that is a valid point still. But the biggest benefit, in my opinion, of groundwork with your horse is noticing and learning, right? You can learn so much about your horse and from your horse as a rider by taking the time and doing the groundwork and noticing what is happening with your horse. And when I talk about groundwork, it doesn't always have to be about lunging or practicing movements in hand. And I know I talked about not calling it work, but geesh, is there another word? In hand, groundwork? I don't know. But you know what I mean. So I'm going to need one of you to find me a better word. Let's find a better word for groundwork. Anyway, moving on. You can also experiment with different body work techniques, right? It doesn't have to be work. Of course, it's called body work too. So anyway, what does that mean? That means that humans, we like to work, and we probably shouldn't. Why do we like to work? That's terrible. Anyway, gosh, you guys are causing me to think a lot this morning about working and how we cannot work so much. Work's a terrible word. Anyway, experiment with different body work techniques. I'm sure there's a body worker out there who has a better term for that. Things like surefoot pads, stretches. There are a whole bunch of other modalities out there that you can play with, that you can learn about your horse. You can learn about yourself when you're doing these if you're really paying attention. No grooming or tacking required, right? You don't have to get out your coveralls. You can stay in them in your puffy jacket. Stay warm. The problem that I see is a lot of riders go back into their work brains, and right, of course, because they're all called work, when they start talking about these modalities. And they see these modalities, even though they are called work, as rest time or unproductive time. If these modalities were unproductive, elite athletes all over the world would not waste their time on them. These modalities are as valuable to you and your horse as they are to athletes all over the world, and they are a valuable part of rider education. 10 minutes of attuned body work can be more useful than a 30 to 45 minute work session or training session. And sadly, this is one thing that riders tend to undervalue. Also, doing these types of modalities help get your creative mind working. You start noticing things about your horse, and can I change that? Will a touch here change it? Will, a hand there make a difference? Doing these things is helping both of you in more ways than just what we see on the surface. And being creative is so helpful in your training programs, even when the weather is good. And for some of you, I'm recording this in the winter right now here in Virginia, but for some of you, riding in the summer is not fun or feasible. Sometimes we have that happen here in Virginia. So let's grow that toolbox now, so when we have times when we can't ride our horses, when we can't really work our horses, that we still can play with them and we can have them be happy. We can be happy. We can make progress. One thing that I do want to discuss again before before I sign off this episode is the anxiety versus energy discussion and good energy versus bad energy. The first rule is to always go with your gut. Trust your instincts. Don't get on a horse you don't feel like you should get on. Get off if you feel like you should. Don't go cantering if you don't feel like you should. Whatever your gut says no to, listen, okay? Because when the energy causes fear or anxiety in a rider, even if the initial energy is coming from the horse, it's going to backfire and come into both, and it can just lead to not good things, okay? And I don't want anybody to get hurt. Nobody needs to sacrifice their confidence to canter their horse on a cold day, okay? It's not necessary. Or to even ride their horse on a cold day. You don't have to ride your horse does not care, okay? But when I do come across a situation where we're having that issue of good or bad energy and who's got the anxiety, who's got the added energy, I really like riders to sit and think for a minute or two or whatever and ask them if they think that there's actually a bad energy vibe coming from the horse, or are they just anxious? The rider. Is the rider just anxious about adding energy to what they already have? And I only do this because I want riders to be able to think their way through an emotional challenge, which this is, and address it rather than ignore it. If we ignore that the rider is anxious about the energy or anxious about anything, we're never going to get over the issue. Even if the rider starts to canter, there's still going to be anxiety about the canter. And there's always going to be that little bit. It's kind of like making sure the basics are really solid with your horse. If you don't, you're always going to find holes in your training. And usually, as you're moving a horse up in their training, the basics have to get better and better and better. So, what your expectation of your trot walk transition was at training level is going to be much different than the same transition when you want to ride FEI level. Okay? The same thing with anxiety. If we are not getting over it, it's not going to go away. It's going to build. The problem will build. The problem will not dissolve. Now, if a rider just says that the horse feels anxious, then we can go, okay, how do we make that horse feel less anxious? How do we introduce this idea of play? Maybe we get off and we do it on the ground. Maybe there's other exercises that we do while riding to help, right? But the same thing, if we push the horse into the canter, for example, and they're anxious about it, and we never address that anxiety, the canter's always going to be a problem. So, again, the problem's going to build. As you want more and more from the canter, it's not going to de-escalate, okay? So, figure out the issue, break it down, work through it. We know that for some horses and riders, winter can be a highly charged time. You know, some horses are stalled. Even if they're not stalled, they're not moving around as much as they typically would be in most situations. And humans, right? We have the days are shorter. We're cold. Like, there's other things going on that are causing us to not necessarily enjoy our days, and that our horses are feeling the same. And that can end up being a highly charged time, just like a competition or any trip off property, right? So we really need to have calm riders who are attuned to their horses and their own emotions. That means the rider's own emotions before we start asking them to go beyond their comfort zones. And I think we're sending riders out beyond their comfort zones way too much, particularly with horses that are anxious in some way. And then we're just asking for trouble. It takes a special kind of rider and a special kind of relationship with a horse to have energy and exuberance without anxiety. There are some riders who are very capable of managing a horse's anxiety and even making it look like exuberance. But there are many more riders who are struggling to manage their own anxiety, let alone their horses. This is not a fault. It's part of the journey and something our horses can help guide us through if we let them. Don't feel like you see this experienced high level rider managing your horses or some other horse's anxiety and feel like I should be able to do that. Why can't I do that? You are not the same people, and that is okay. All right? Your horse can teach you far more, probably, than that trainer, and probably more than you will teach your horse ever, if you just show up for them, playful and curious. I hope this episode resonates with you. Please reach out to me if you want any ideas or you need help rousing that playful and curious side. Remember, you can always join the Patreon community. There you can get access to the Dressage Naturally video classroom where you can get all kinds of ideas. And we can talk about all kinds of fun things like rider and horse anxiety and whether we should call it work or not. My goal is for all of you to find joy and happiness and be playful when you're riding, not to be anxious, not for it to be hard, and not for you to feel frustrated. I hope this episode helps. Thanks for listening, and I will talk to you next time. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Come Ride With Me. My goal is to demonstrate to riders that we don't have to do something every second of a ride. We don't have to do things a certain way or at a certain time. Just staying present with your horse and gathering non-judgmental information about how they are going is way more beneficial than overthinking and overworking. If you'd like to learn more about what I do at Equus Enlightened, you can find me at equisenlightened.net or on patreon.com/equisenlightened. You can also find me on social media as Equus Enlightened. I will put all the links in the show notes. And until next time, happy riding. Oh, before you go, please remember to rate, review, and share this pod so others can find it. I would love constructive criticism, but like my mom used to say, if you don't have anything really nice to say, there's no need to say it. Just ride on, my friends. Have a great week.